Good afternoon, Suzuki Science, grade 11s. This is more directed at cohort A than it is cohort B. Cohort B, we talked about this particular concept today, Friday. Cohort A, we didn't have time this week for me to talk about this in class. This is the last concept in genetics. There was actually a couple of concepts I don't believe I covered, but I want to make sure I cover this because it is an important part of the genetic story. So you know, from what we've learned, that the genes are you learn that there's a dominant and there's a recessive. And so if the dominant is present, it will be expressed. If it's not present, then the recessive will be expressed. We've talked about incomplete dominance with the mixing of traits, but with codominance and X-linked and regular simple genetic problems, we know the dominant allele, if it's present, it'll be expressed. And so we have this binary situation where there's two traits, black and white, tall and short, axial and terminal. But that's not always the case. So what I told our class to do was to look at the everyone around you. And if you're at home, you can get up, walk around your house, and you probably have a pretty good visual image of what everyone in your home looks like. And as you look at all the people in your home, as you look at the people in your class, as you look at the people in the school, in your community, in your tribe, you'll notice that there's many different shades of color. I'm going to focus on color here. And one of the interesting colors that is actually a genetic mutation is this one here. Known as albinism, an albino. You've probably seen an albino tiger or an albino lion. You see them all over the animal kingdom, but they also happen in humans as well. Interesting story is that even to this day, it's not as severe as today, but even to this day, there's a group of several countries in the African continent where if you're an albino, they consider that you're possessed, and the community still subscribes to some of these tales that are not based in science, and they believe that they're really bad luck, and they're certain people with this albino gene that or defect that causes them to have albinism that are claiming refugee status outside their country because they're being persecuted and killed. Anyway, so how does albino work? Think about what an albino person looks like, if you've ever seen one. They have white hair, which we've talked about being controlled by a gene. They have red eyes, which is another gene. They have very white skin. They have their tongue tied. There's a little extra piece of tissue that ties the tongue to the bottom of the mouth. They have a number of things. And albino is the defect in one gene, a mutation in one gene, and that causes all these things to occur. So that concept is known as pleiotropy, right? So by definition, pleiotropy is a gene that affects more than one phenotype. So that is all you need to know about this. So if you see one gene and affects several phenotypes, that's known as pleiotropy. So I want to bring us over to the other idea. So coming back to skin color. So I've talked about albinism. So when I look at the skin color, the spectrum of skin color, you'll notice that there is a spectrum indeed, right? If we look at all the peoples of the world, we know we can go from the darkest dark to the lightest light. But if you just look at a particular family, or a particular, as I mentioned before, I like using the word tribe. A tribe of people, even though they might be closely related, even though they might have ancestors that are similar, you'll still see a spectrum of colors in their skin. And skin color, like many other things, is not controlled by a single gene. Up until now, I told you hair was controlled by a single gene, for example, black and blonde, even though there's other shades of color. I've told you that tongue roller, hitchhiker's thumb, dimples, extra finger, all these things are controlled by a single gene with two different forms. And then we learned about codominance, where you can have more than one dominant. But that's not the true story. We've simplified it. Most phenotypes are controlled by a set of genes. Skin color, for example, is controlled by over 50 genes. 50 different genes code for skin color. I'm going to give you an example with 3. I'm going to pretend there's 3 different genes coding for skin color. And we're going to look at what that span looks like. But what's amazing, we know what the variation can be with one gene in 2 different forms. So imagine what it's like with 50. And think about all the judgments and all the ideas we have about a person just based on the skin. We say, oh, the skin looks this way, it's this dark or it's this light. Therefore, they're this type of person. When you look at I'm going to take the continent of Africa. When you look at the continent of Africa, the diaspora of people there, and you look at their skin color, and you look at their genes, the genes of people on Eastern Africa, Western Africa, Southern Africa, Northern Africa are much more distant than if you took a person from Eastern Africa and compared them to Scandinavia, or Northern Africa and compare them to the Middle East. So judging a person based on their skin has no scientific foundation at all. So there's this person, there's a video I'm going to put on the link with this that I want you to watch. And Angelica Das, it's a TED Talk, and it's about 18 minutes long. And it might seem long when you're trying to get through your work and you have other things you want to pay attention to. But I encourage you to watch this, because we don't often, I want to in my class, but I know in many classes we don't often talk about skin color and the effect that it has on you as an individual and how society sees you based on what your skin looks like. So she does a wonderful story. She's a photographer, and she did this Humana project where she took skin color and matched them up to the Pantone paint colors. So when you go to paint your home, you often go to those little pieces of paper and they have like a little number. And so she's looking at the diversity of people and looking at the skin color and seeing that it's so diverse. She's a remarkable woman, and I would encourage you to watch at least half the video, if not the whole thing. I think you'll find it interesting. This goes beyond just science. It is more than that. It's a sociological, very current concept. And the topic will give you something to talk about with your family and your friends. Right? So click on that. I'm not going to play it now because it's not really a part of this lesson. Okay? So I'm going to go into the lesson, and what I want to talk about is give you some foundation. I want to give you some foundation in the science so that you know how skin color might be determined. So with skin color, we might have something like this. Here's a gene, A. And if you have the A gene, that will make your skin dark. If you have the lowercase or recessive a, then you don't get that unit of dark, melanin. If you have a B, that will make your skin dark. If you have a lowercase b, recessive b, no. If you have a C, that will make your skin dark. So these are 3 different genes. And all 3 genes are going to contribute to the color of your skin, the darkness of your skin, let's say. So using this information, the darkest skin possible, using these 3 genes, A, B, and C, would be this. 3 genes all dominant. And the lightest skin possible would be this. So these have all the units of darkness, melanin, and these have none of the units. They're not albino, they're just going to be the lightest shade possible. So there's only one possibility here, all smalls, and one possibility here, all bigs. So let's go to the next one, where you have one big and all smalls. So here's 1, here's 2, here's 3, here's 4, here's 5, and here's 6. So there's 1 at the extreme, and there's 6 at the next level. And as you continue to look at the other possibilities that can exist, you'll see that there is 15 at the next, and the most common one in the middle, when we look at 3 and 3, 3 bigs and 3 smalls, there's 20. As we get closer to the middle, we have more. This is a classic normal curve. So if you study statistics and look at population studies, you'll see most variation, most traits that vary in the population follow a typical normal curve. So if you go outside and you take all the people in the entire school and you tell them to stand by height, you'll see there's more people in the middle, an average height, and less people at the ends, the 4'5" and the 7 feet. And if you look at skin color, the same idea. And if you look at weight, the same idea. So most things where there's a spectrum of variation in the population follows a normal curve. And we talk a little bit more about that in grade 12, and you'll talk a lot more about that in university biology if you take that. Okay? So this is a possibility. And this, whoops, here. is the most common possibility because there's so many different possible combinations where there's 3 big and 3 small. So this whole idea is called polygenics. And it's where you have more than one gene controlling a specific phenotype. So in this case, I'm talking about 3 genes that control skin color. And that gives you 64 genotypes, 7 different phenotypes. And that's only 3 genes. So when I tell you there's 50 genes, over 50 genes that control skin color, now think about that variation. And when you think about it like that, how ludicrous is it that you're judging a person and pigeonholing them and saying that they belong, that this is their manifest destiny. This is what they're supposed to do based on the color of their skin. When there's 50 different genes that control it. Think about all the other variations. So we've talked about this in the beginning of the course with genetic diversity, right? Genetic biodiversity is very important. So if you don't have the genetic biodiversity, you end up having deleterious genes, mutated genes, bad genes that become more prevalent in the population. And you want to have lots of variation. So there's a strong argument for intermingling with people outside your tribe to increase that genetic biodiversity. And I'm not going to go into that in this particular piece here, but I want you thinking about that. So that's polygenics. I did talk about pleiotropy, and I want you to watch that video. So if you do all those things, then you'll get a better understanding of this concept. Now, with the cohort A, when I taught you X-linked, one of the things I didn't go back to is I didn't go back to the pedigrees. On the pedigrees, I went over dominant and recessive, but I didn't go into detail or show you the follow-up X-linked pedigrees. So do make sure that you are reviewing those. I did teach it, but I didn't go in the same details I did with cohort B. So do make sure that you review it. Next week, on Tuesday, cohort A, you have your in-class test. I will be very specific about what kind of questions. I'll tell you now. Both cohort A and cohort B, you'll have one simple single trait question, one more complex question that has 2 or more traits. You'll have an X-linked, you'll have a co-dominant, you'll have an incomplete dominant, and you'll have a pedigree. Right. So those are the questions that will be on your in-class. You'll do your quiz at your test at 10:30. If you think you need more time, I'm giving half an hour, and if you know what you're doing, you can easily complete it in 20 minutes. But if you think you need more time, then you can stay after 11. You're more than welcome to. If someone's going to pick you up, then let them know to come and pick you up a little bit later. Friday is when cohort B will have their test. And then Thursday, during our SLP, I'll be teaching a lesson. And then the last half of that SLP, I'll say, okay, it's time. And then I'll open up the online version of the test, and you'll take it. It will be timed. You'll have a certain window to take that test. And it will be mostly multiple choice and straight knowledge, like the word list stuff and straight definition, things like that. There might be a really simple kind of genetic problem where I don't need to see the work in order to understand that you understand what the genetic question is asking. Okay, so I think that about summarizes what you missed cohort A. Again, polygenics. You'll see a question in the rebop about polygenics. I think I might have a question about pleiotropy. I don't remember, and I will not help you with those questions. But if you have a question about this because you did not get a chance to practice it, then please ask, and I'll do one of these and explain it to you in the rest of the class. One of the things that I did mention to cohort B and I mentioned to cohort A is I need you to create your rebop. You need to draw it out. And at some point I'm going to make an announcement, and I think we decided, cohort B and I, that Wednesday is a good date. So by Wednesday you should have your rebop actually drawn. And then we're going to collect it. I'll make a big gallery, and then you can see all the different rebops, and then you'll be able to answer some of the rebop questions more specifically. Okay? That's it. I will see you on Monday afternoon. I hope you guys have a fantastic weekend, and I'll talk to you later.